Witness as faith and surfing collide in our new series that sheds light on the captivating journey of a vast community forged through faith and waves. Welcome to the origin of a legacy, the story of Christian surfers South Africa. From the rugged coastline of Cape Town to the sandy shores of Durban, a vision had been established and a legacy was born. Each episode invites you into the history and footsteps of those who forged the path of Christian surfers in South Africa. Fueled with a love for Jesus and sharing his good news with all through the medium of surf culture, join us as we dive into the testimonies that make up the origin of Christian surfers South Africa. Thrill over untold stories and immerse yourself in the experiences of the individuals that charged into the challenges set before them, pioneering the foundation of the community you and I have the privilege to be a part of.
Cool. So I'm here with my really good mate and brother, Andy Pitt. And our story goes way back to the beginning, even before the beginning of this series. And it's going to be a real pleasure and privilege to interview mate. A lot of good water under the bridge.
Yeah.
A lot of things that we've done in life that have I think given a lot of spice to the living the life to the full. Has definitely been something I think we've both done really well.
Absolutely.
Cool. So I got a couple of questions. Now that and we're definitely at that stage where we need glasses, which is
and caps.
I got to put sunscreen in like strange places now. Otherwise I'm like
Exactly right.
Cool. So a couple of good questions quickly. Rapid fire. Goofy or regular?
Regular.
Okay.
I think.
Favorite wave in the world?
JV, Super Tubes.
Nice. Springboks, All Blacks, or Wallabies?
Wannabes, never. Springboks, all the way. Boka.
Come on, man.
Yeah.
Rugby World Cup final or the WSL final?
Oh, rugby for sure.
Okay. Rugby World Cup final or WSL final if Geordie's in the final?
Geordie all the way.
Wow. Okay.
Back in the brother.
There you go, man. There we go. Cool. So, and then maybe from there, just like let us know, like how did you become a Christian?
I was a bit of a lost boy. I went to the army, and after the military, 86, 87, I think a bit of trauma and stuff. We had done some things and seen some things and fought some war. And it took a couple of years, I think, to work that stuff out of the system. I found marijuana to be quite a good coping mechanism during that time. So I was pretty toasted and fried and lost. I'd done a trainee manager's course that I really didn't enjoy. But through all of that, I was kind of just really lost. I was a lost boy, a prodigal, And I was kind of wondering why life is worth living and all that stuff. I was a bit of a surf bum, living in Ganubi. And it's funny enough, I went to the beach in Ganubi one afternoon. Yeah. And there was a competition on the beach. And then I asked the guys what the competition was about. And they said, no, it's a sun surf compo. And it's the local pastor running this compo, and they're doing it to reach surfers. And
sun surf as in S-O-N.
S-O-N.
Yeah.
And so I scoffed at it. I was like, the kooky Christians. And I'm a pastor's son. So anyway, and then God got a hold of me just a month or two after that, a real low in my life. And somewhere in that conversation, I really felt I was really down. And I really just felt God's presence there, like in a tangible way. Like visually, I could see him at the bottom of my bed. He didn't leave. And I just gave him what for and told him what I thought about life and stuff. And somewhere in that conversation, I said, I'm going to go to church. I'll go to church tomorrow night. My mum had been telling me about this Baptist pastor at Ganubi. Got to go and meet him and stuff. And so I said to God somewhere in that state, I'm going to go to church tomorrow night. And if you love me, you do something there. Otherwise, I'm going to come do something stupid that I've been thinking about. And I went to church the next night, and I wanted to just melt into the back seat and be anonymous. And walked straight into a couple of surf groms who pulled me right up to the front to come and sit with them, which I didn't enjoy. And then they were all up singing and clapping and doing their thing. And I was like, flip, I'm so uncomfortable. So uncomfortable. I just don't, I want to crawl under the seat, And then this guy stepped up to preach. And he was from America. And he preached on Peter. Peter jumping out of the boat. I think it's John 22 or something. Peter jumping out of the boat and coming back to the beach and meeting Jesus there, It was after this miraculous catch of fish. And that was me. And I was like, I knew it, And before I could do anything, I was up front and I was crying. But, God healed me so much through that, And Steve, the pastor there, just discipled me and loved me. And it was all I needed. That church really just wrapped their arms around me. And so I was saved as a young kid and baptized. But I think that was my real salvation experience, That was that. Not going back. I found all that I'm looking for here,
So the surf contest, that was the pastor was Steve Mann, right?
Yeah.
Petrolhead from Johannesburg, who ended up in probably one of the world's best surf destinations, Ganubi.
Yeah, great town, surf spot.
Yes, and obviously looked out and just like literally the church sits up on this hill and looks straight out over a beautiful wave, I think called Black
Rock.
There's a point break and a reef break and then a beach break and then a left reef break. It's just the most amazing surf destination. And he wanted to share Jesus with those surfers but he was not culturally a surfer. So he started the Sun Surf Contest.
Yeah, he was running with Baptist Youth of Eastern Cape or East London. And somewhere in one of their committee meetings, they must have said, let's try this thing.
And a year later, you were on
running
deck.
It.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the one that you invited me to come to.
Yeah.
But interesting enough, just before this interview, we were chatting and we met at a place at summer camp, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting part of it. It's amazing to me how God works out his plan, because I was in the army at the time. And as you know, in the army, you don't get passes very regularly. And a pass is like, it's so hard to explain to someone, like the ability to go home and see your family.
Precious time.
It is literally you'll literally sacrifice everything to go just for that moment. You basically live for that weekend. And I felt God called me to come to this camp.
Yeah.
And so I'd asked for leave to come to the camp, and my CO called me in, and I was in training. So I was in junior leadership training to become a lieutenant. And he said, you can go to the camp, but then you have to give up your pass. So you have to sacrifice your time with your family if you want to go do this Christian thing. And they thought I was using Christianity as a crutch to get out of, to dodge things.
Yeah.
And I basically almost burst into tears in front of him and said, okay, I'll do it. And
wow.
And he said, great, your pass is done. And he sent me off to camp. And I didn't know. I honestly thought that was it. And the amazing thing was, I came to the camp, I met you. If I hadn't met you, you wouldn't have known to connect me with the surf contest. This is coming to the end of my military time anyway. And the beautiful part of the story is that actually when the passes were handed out, mine was there. So I ended up actually going to connect with at summer camp.
Put in Jesus first.
Yeah, that was amazing. That's a whole other part of my own personal story. But I think it's amazing that God knew that he needed me at that place, and he needed me to meet you, because the next time that I met you was at the Sun Surf Contest in East London.
Ganubi. Yeah.
With another guy named Craig Cuff.
Yeah, and that's
you
right.
You were running the contest.
Yeah.
You're the one that
for
said,
my sins, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing because, I was a surfer and I loved surfing so much, And Ganubi was this really cool place. You could walk from break to break to break. And so it was just this little beautiful surf bubble. And surfing had become really important to me because of it. And the contest, I was never a competition surfer, ever. But because I met Jesus and he filled my tank in such a beautiful way, I knew this kind of tank filling is what every surfer needs, somehow to not just connect with this beautiful thing called a wave, but the creator of the waves. And so for me, it was a natural step. And there was a guy named Pat Dupree, who was the local surf shop owner. And Steve worked through Pat to help him put the first one together. And so the next one I worked with Pat, and the next one I worked with Pat. And we started to build it. But I contacted you and I contacted Craig Cuff, and there was this funky Aussie dude from Coffs Harbour called Jason Illevolson. And somehow a year later, maybe 90 or 91, you guys all bomb dropped the event. You brought a crew up from Cape Town, Craig brought some surfers from PE, and Jason came. And Jason was quite a public dude. I think they even brought their band, did they? Or maybe that was a year or two later. But there was some really cool connection. And I remember being at the contest, and the contest became the catalyst for us starting to talk about what ministry to surfers could be. So that was sort of on the one side. As we chatted with you, there was this guy's name that came up called Brett Davis from Australia. And this was pre-email. And so we wrote to Brett. And I remember writing to Brett from East London and writing to him going, hey, we're thinking about Christian surfers, and we had seen an ad and heard some stories, and we really liked the prospect or the concept. And so Brett wrote back. We were all surprised, right? Brett started to write back, and Brett was so committed there again. And then he wrote back, and that was really, really cool. And so 1 or 2 letters in, Brett said, why don't you come to Australia? Nothing I'd ever thought about before, other than that sounded like a really cool idea. So I worked for South African Airways at the time. I was working in a freight office, but it had a great travel perk. And so I'd been to Mauritius on holiday, and that's another cool story. But Brett said, come to Australia. And so I was able to get a stupidly discounted ticket and go to the Christian Surfers Conference at Phillip Island in 91.
Wow.
And I think I was the first South African to be over on Australian shores at a Christian Surfers Conference. And that was really cool. And I met Brett, I met some of the crew, did a roadie up from Phillip Island back to Sydney with them. But just the grafting of hearts and seeing a vision going, we could do this in South Africa, what they were doing in Australia, and feeling firsthand that national conference, how it worked, and the gathering of people. And it was so cool because it was not denominational. It was just surfers gathering together, and Jesus became the center of those events. And we heard some amazing stories, met some amazing people on that trip, and then came home. One of the guys who was at that conference was Steve Bailey, who was at that stage still Naughty Grom, I think, or he had some sort of leadership role that he was beginning to pick up. But it wasn't national at that stage. Yeah. So it was maybe a regional coordinator or something. But he was young, and I was young, and it was really cool. But there was a deposit in us being there, and it brought some of that idea, vision back, and some materials that Brett had written, and we started to gather and talk a bit about some of that. So the Ganubi event was one thing, the travel was another, and then beginning to implement that. And then we had Jason Illevolson, who was part of...
Before you move on the travel, did you go to Hawaii?
Yeah.
So tell us about, because Christian surfers... Okay, so the interesting thing I think is that when we started as Sun Surf.
Sun Surf,
and there's 2 things I want to pick up on. Sun Surf was a conversation between me and Dimitri. And we had heard about Christian surfers, we'd written to Brett, and we were literally sitting on a living room floor, and we were like at Graham Ganeski's in his house there, and we're like, well, what are we, Christian surfers or Sun Surf? And like, you think, when you look back, you think, well, we spent hours praying about it, but we were just like, oh, we like Sun Surf, so we'll just call ourselves Sun Surf. But Sun Surf wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for Steve Mann, who wasn't a surfer, who started a Sun Surf contest that you ran, which was the first place we met. And I remember our big, deep strategy was, me, you, and Craig Cuff, was just to leave here and go and do something. Like literally, that was it. That was our big plan. Just go and do something wherever you are and see what happens.
Exactly right.
But it's interesting that Brett is part of the origin story, because Brett catalyzed and pulled the world together in a way. And so we get to that tricky moment where we've got to decide, or we Sun Surf or be Christian surfers. But before that, there were these conferences called Surf Ministry International Conferences. So Christian Surfers International, Christian Surfers didn't exist globally. But there were these gatherings, and one of the first ones happened.
The first one.
The very first
Yeah,
ever
yeah.
international gathering of a surf ministries happens in Hawaii, and I think
Craig Cuff and I.
two of you were there. Craig got lost along the way, and we didn't know where he was.
Well, Craig just arrived, like out of the woodwork.
As usual.
Like, I'd coordinated with Brett and stuff.
So hang on. So Brett said, "Hey, did you go to Australia and then come back, and then did you say, let's go to Hawaii?"
I went to Australia for the national gathering, Phillip Island. That was amazing. Picked up stuff there, and then out of that, I think it was the time when God was brewing something internationally, and so there were all these contacts that Brett had picked up from around the world, and so yeah, he said, all of you come to Hawaii, and I'd never been to Hawaii, and it was like, oh, that's literally halfway across the world from here. And so, yeah, I didn't really know that Craig was even going until I got there, and Brett was like, oh, Craig's going to be here too. I was like, what? And then he just popped out of the woodwork somewhere, and Craig arrived, and he had nice long hair, surfy, and he ripped, of course, Craig. Played guitar, he was everything there, and I was like, man. But we were there together, and it was really cool. We surfed some amazing spots, ate some amazing food, and just got amongst it, sort of pinching ourselves the whole way, going, how the heck did we get here? But suddenly we were part of an international conversation and an international family of like-minded people, men and women from all over the world.
And I think for me, what's amazing is how God kind of did this. And I think what's important, I think, for folk watching this is it was a strange era in surfing. So the fact that Steve Mann, a Baptist pastor, was willing to run a surf competition, or that Graham Ganetsky was willing to have surfers in his church, was not normal. Like surfing and Christianity were basically at that stage like oil and water. Yeah. And when I came home and said, hey, Mom, I'm going to be a surfer, it wasn't like joy, it was like, oh no, the druggy, the whole deal.
That's right.
Certainly wasn't something that was very, my school principal was definitely not excited when I asked if we could start a surf club. Basically, he laughed at me and said that will never be associated with the name of the school. So it's interesting because there's this sense of like, this can't be a Christian thing. So much resistance. I remember being in Cape Town. I remember a pastor asking me, what am I doing? Like, I'm wasting my life. I remember the principal at the Bible college I was studying at asking me when I'm going to grow up and get into real ministry. And yet, while that's happening, there's this passion for surfing, which really pulls you into a life to the full, this life that Jesus offers us. And there's this hand of God that's working, that Andy Pitt happens to be working, happens to have come to know Jesus, happens to be in a church with a pastor that's okay with this, which is very, very rare, happens to be working for South African Airways, is able to go to Australia and meet the founder of the whole global movement, and then also go to Hawaii and meet in Hawaii at the very first conference. And I didn't get to go to Hawaii for a long time, but it's interesting because Eric Arakawa, one of the international board members, he's been part of Christian Surfers from day dot as well. He, years later at that conference, we were driving in a car. It was my first time in Hawaii. And he was like, there's more national leaders at this conference than there were delegates at the first conference. There's more people leading whole countries. But I want to just pull back on that. So you and Craig Cuff end up in Hawaii. Amazing, at the very first ever international gathering. And I think that gives us you come back to South Africa, and in our conversations, that for me really gives us an endorsement. Like, we're not crazy. There is something that's happening here. And it's not just happening in South Africa, it's happening globally. And Jesus is at the center of this. And then I just wanted to touch base with, you mentioned earlier the Lost Boys, but there's another Lost Boy, though, that comes into the story. So he's not quite made it to Hawaii. I'll let you pick it up from there.
I grew up surfing Kids Beach in East London, and it was this cool little beach with my good friend Tim. And Tim and I started surfing together. We were 14, 1981, I think. So we started surfing. He got an old surfboard, and suddenly there were 4 or 5 of us that got old surfboards. So we'd all go surfing together, which was great. And Tim had a grandfather who lived in Kids Beach. So any excuse to get to Grandpa Fred's for a couple of days and go surfing was the died and gone to heaven thing. And Tim had a cousin who lived in Cape Town, from Durbanville, Nicky Forrest.
Dimitri Nikiforos.
And he was a year or two younger than us, so we bullied him a little bit.
Bit
But
of grom abuse.
bit of grom abuse. But we had some fun times down at Kids Beach. And over the years, my high school years, got to know Dimitri a bit.
Wow.
Because of his cousin Tim. And so yeah, Dimitri, on one of my trips to Cape Town, I flew to Cape Town at one time, and I caught up with Dimitri. And we went surfing together up at Blouberg, and I think it was Big Bay and whatever. And yeah, he was a naughty little whatever. And but God had got hold of my heart, you know, and I had a real compassion for Dimitri. And I can remember sitting in his car, because I think I was going to Orange Street Baptist to connect with you. And I was sitting in Dimitri's car with him, a little Golf, I think it was, and we were sitting. And I was telling him about what God had done in my life, and this kind of like, you know, the butt theology thing. God got hold of me, and I can't deny it, and it's an amazing thing. And he was a disillusioned Durbanville Baptist boy, I would think, who was walking his own wild path. And so he was sort of, yeah, I don't want a bar of it. But I remember having that conversation in the car with him about Christian surfers and what God was doing, and it was exciting. And at that stage, he kind of didn't express too much what's happening. He had a girlfriend, and he was doing the Cape Town Wild Child thing. But I remember having that conversation with Dimitri. And then it wasn't too long afterwards, I think I got him in touch with you. I think that's where that clutch happened maybe. And then out of that...
Yeah, I'm not sure how it happened, but I think you're probably right. There was probably, like, remember, there wasn't any web pages. There wasn't any way of knowing, like, there's no way to join the dots. You didn't go onto Instagram and go, oh, there's this Christian Surfers thing happening. I'm going to be part of it. So it's interesting for me how God joins these dots. So because of your connection with Dimitri, you probably brought him to Cape Town Baptist. In Cape Town Baptist, there was the whole beginning of Sunsurf, things that were happening there.
Yeah.
And I think Dimitri, for me, was looking in from the outside, going, you know, like, are these guys kooky or are these guys surfers?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the most powerful things about surfing or Christian surfers is really everyone is a surfer. We were surfers. Like, we were the real deal. We would live to surf, bunked college to surf, did whatever we needed to do to surf. I often remember sitting in on a Sunday night, and Graham would be preaching, and the front row would be full of these groms, and we'd all be like with the nods because we'd spent the whole day surfing. But I think it was that authenticity, that this is a surf cultural thing that grabbed Dimitri. But he would have never made that connection if it wasn't for his relationship with you, and his role in founding a movement like Christian Surfers Sunsurf South Africa was phenomenal. You know, but this was all unknown at the time. It's amazing how God just joins the dots, right?
Yeah. I think something that I'd forgotten to say is that Dimitri was in the Navy, but because he was a year or two younger, I'd done my army, and then I'd got back to the Lord. So he was in the Navy in East London, chefing.
Oh, wow.
But we'd go surfing together over weekends and stuff. Yeah. And so that's where some of that connection with Dimitri sort of happened. And it was amazing to see and beautiful to see his gifts really being used in the early establishment of Sunsurf. And it was such a joy for me to see the Sunsurf name all over it. And I remember being very patriotic about that in the name, because it was our roots, it was our story, it was our connection. And
Sunsurf has a deeper, longer connection in your life in some ways. So I want to just skip through that. So you go from being this, this guy working for
South African
Airways. Yeah. But I remember often, like, myself and Dimitri packing a whole lot of like brand new 7-day-old Christians into vans.
Yeah.
And I remember them coming to stay on a camp
Baptist
at your church, at Genivi Baptist.
Yeah.
And I remember with absolute, in some ways, horror and grace, the fact that how gracious you were, because the kids arrived, left their porn magazines inside the rooms,
peed on each other for a few things,
blew up people's post boxes. I mean, these are people that are not from a church background. They're surfers, and they just like
feral,
all the while, the Lost Boys, right? But how did I remember the welcome, the warmth, the sense of connectedness, and how did you go from being sort of in East London, part of the church, to being the pastor at the church? the surfing pastor?
Well, I think just it took a couple of years. So we ran the Sunsurf Comp for a couple of years. I worked with Steve and under Steve, and I got onto that Baptist, Border Baptist Youth Committee and stuff. And there were other things that we were doing around the Eastern Cape and getting people to summer camp every year. It was that annual thing. But that too was so important. It was the place where I would go and get tanked up and restored. And but I'd take Groms from our church up, and they were all surfers. So yeah, they certainly were full of shenanigans and did their own thing. But God was getting hold of them through exposure to the summer camp. And Graham Ganetsky, that pastor from Orange Street, Cape Town, was the guy who initiated those Baptist summer camps back in the day. So there's this whole link between the trellis and the vine. The trellis being Baptist churches and Baptist youth movement, which it really was back in the early 90s or late 80s, 90s. And yet there was space within that for this wild, feral thing called Sunsurf to grow. But the two served each other. And Craig in Saved Surf Club, they started as Saved Surf Club. So out of that surf comp that we ran, the Sunsurf comp, was Craig, yourself, who else? It was really, and myself. So I remember us saying at the end of that, let's go and just do something in our communities. You in Cape Town under Orange Street Baptist, Craig with Saved Surf Club under whatever his church or Harvest, and me in Ganubi. And so that was sort of those early thrusts, and remember the vision of the fire lighting up around parts of the country. And that was the initial thing. And God's favor was on it. We did stupid things. We did maverick things.
I remember a little incident where we came up and connected with all your crazy crew from Cape Town. And we had the latest big deal back then, no YouTube guides. So like if you had a surf video, it was like a super, super cool thing. And we'd got the latest surf video from Australia. I don't know how we'd got it. Maybe a Jack McCoy. I don't know what it was. And there was this thing that I'd been hearing about, Bible bashing. And I was like, what is Bible bashing?
I remember that.
And
Numbers disco.
Yeah. So there was this, this is someone who's been a Christian for like a week. And I was like, well, bro, what is this thing? And he's like, well, I don't know if this is like a 15-year-old kid from where I'm living. He's like, and he looks at me with these innocent eyes, like, I'm not sure if this is how you're supposed to do it. But basically what we do is we go to the same parties we were going to last week. We preach, we give a guy so many beers that he's almost falling over drunk and gets drunk for drit, which is like, he's crying because and then we make him feel so bad. We preach the gospel at him. We smash the beer bottles. We lead him to Jesus and take him to church on Sunday.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow. And he's like, well, it's working. Like there's all these guys coming, all these surfers. And so this is the crew that we've got in a van now. Bring it up to your space. Got this video. And I remember being in Ganubi in one of that little restaurant that looks out over the bay. Absolutely stunning. Everyone's ready to watch this movie. Our camp speaker bailed on us. Like literally, I'm packing the van, loading surfboards onto the roof in the trailer. And I get the phone call that he's not coming. I'm like, great. What am I going to do? So we had this extra money, this budget. And I chatted to you and we were like, you know what? Why don't we take all the Groms and pay for them to go Bible bash in Numbers Disco.
That's right.
Under 18. Man. And I just remember packing your crew in the car, our crew in the car, paying for all these kids to go into this
disco.
This under 18 disco. And the chaos, absolute chaos, like a night of like wild insanity and chaos.
Yeah.
I don't think anything happened evangelically. I mean, the guys tried, but it was just complete chaos.
Yeah.
And then I remember getting into so much trouble when I came home and had explained to the church that I'd blown all this portion of the budget on paying for
disco
kids
access.
to get into disco. But at the same time, there was this maverickness and this absolute clean living, but passion for life. So
there were a couple of Groms that you brought up with you that were part of your tribe. I think another guy that we need to mention by name here is Mike Geldenes. What a legend. And Mike, I think Mike wore a lot of criticism as well on our behalf. And Mike's just such a legend. I think he's affected so many of us in a good way. But these Groms were the lights.
You're right. He gave permission.
Yeah.
And probably fielded that in between space where
Not a surfer,
speaking
from
to-
Joburg.
yeah, but speaking to the brass about the latest chaos that we had
Shenanigans.
caused,
Yeah,
and then admonishing us and saying you need to tighten up your act, boys.
yeah,
But it was kind of the guy in the middle of both, I guess.
yeah, he certainly was. And it was great to have Mike around a couple of those events. But there were guys like Terran Williams
Well, there's
and
there's
Brendan Goosen and a couple of others.
Mark Edwards.
That naughty bugger.
Yes,
Mark
that
Edwards,
Was, that
you
was
know.
a.
Yeah,
So it's interesting for me because Terran's the first guy that finds Jesus through Christian Surfers at one of these events.
at one of these
in
events.
Ganubi.
Yeah,
In your church.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
There's Terran Williams. He's one of the kids. Terran Williams and Brendan Goosen. These hot little surfers from Sea Point.
Yeah.
Friends with Nathan Ganetsky, who's at school there.
Pastor son.
All come together and come up the very first drive to East London to Ganubi. Brendan gives his life to Jesus on the first night. Terran, I didn't know this. I'm preaching, but Terran's the only guy who's not a believer. And Terran actually, the thing that catalyzes Terran's an incredible brain, 110% for maths, is just this really
photographic. I remember.
Yeah, incredible surfer, incredible human, and he is on the beach paddling out to blacks. Nathan Ganetsky has been sharing the gospel with him. And he goes, but I believe in Jesus. And this speaks so much to me about, I think, how God works in some beautiful ways that we're not aware of. Someone plants, someone waters, but somebody else reaps. And Nathan and Terran come up to me on the beach and he says, hey, but Terran says he believes in Jesus. And I hardly even think about it. I'm like, yeah, but so does the devil. I'll put my leash on and I'll paddle out. That's it. That's all I said. It was just like a comment before. I was like, I want to go out to surf, guys.
Yeah.
And that, in Terran being such a thinker, really wrestles with his brain, and that night he accepts Jesus.
Yeah.
But he then goes back to Cape Town, and it's the discipleship and the connection there in Christian Surfers that really, I think, changes it. And then you're right, the other guy to talk about would be probably one of the naughtiest little groms, Mark Edwards.
Pinelands Baptist.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's a story that needs to be told.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a beautiful, beautiful, interesting story that is so much part of this legacy.
And
I think at the time, though, like he's come from this Christian environment and now he's hanging out with this wild group. And I think Mark is wild at heart. So he, I think, resonated with what we were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there was always mischief. There was always fun and games and stuff. But, there was a lot of evangelizing in it all, whether it was formal or informal. The guys had to sit through some messages and stuff. But then there was the informal, around bedtimes and, just the things of camp and being on camp, and living examples that were being put around those guys, And I think it was the same for Craig in PE, He had guys that were on the outside, lost boys who became found boys, and through their processes and things that they were doing, as we were in Ganubi. And so more and more people and individuals began to pack into this thing. There was Joey Kelho with Craig.
That lost boys, found boys thing is super interesting because in some ways, I think when I started surfing, I kind of found my tribe. And it felt very much to me like it wasn't a Christian thing, but I didn't feel as lost or as alone because I might have been taped with duct tape and put upside down in a dustbin and, with Grom abuse, but I was their Grom. I belonged to this crew of surfers. And I think that's such a powerful thing that Jesus does is he makes us part of his tribe. And I think the magic was the fact that lost boys becoming found boys, not just in surfing, but in a much deeper way in their faith. But so in some ways, I wanted to just fast forward. You end up going to study in Cape Town, right?
Yeah. So I was being discipled by Steve, and that went on for a couple of years. So again, this was 90, 91, 92, 93. 94, I got married to Debs, and that was awesome. I was running a Christian surfer club, or a sun surf club in my house, which was wild. Every night we'd fill it, every Monday night we'd fill it out. There was a guy named Chris Van Vieren, and Chris was also a lovely Christian young guy from East London, a goofy footer, and so Chris came on board, and Stoffy, and we prayed for 6 months. Like, what do we do? How do we do this thing? And we just prayed about it for 6 months. And we'd go surfing as often as we can. We were out at Nahoon Reef and everywhere else. And Chris and I started to, I think it was more a prayer meeting. And out of that, God just blew this thing up. And so others came in,
Shannon?
Craig's brother, Brad. I was the generation before, so I'd already moved to Cape Town when Shannon came on board. But it was really cool. God was just gathering people around this Christian surfer gig.
What's interesting for me is, so if you think about this, it starts with random bits and connections that we've been talking about, you know, and then there's this idea. I think it's baked by Dimitri, and he's like, we should have a national conference because they do one in Australia. So we picked Jeffreys Bay, and
the campsite out there.
CSV,
yeah.
and so we're all from all over the country, and really, it's amazing. I think there's something that happens there that is just beyond profound, because each person has been doing something. You've been doing something in East London. Craig's been doing something with Save Surf Club in PE. There's this whole little movement starting to spark up in different places in Cape Town.
And we're starting to connect between each other, formally and informally.
Yeah. Still, again, no emails, no Instagram, all phone calls, but at this stage, you know, probably with landlines. So, and I think I remember being with you at the conference here. And the thing that's obvious is that there's a gap. There's no one in Durban. And, you know, I think that's where we start praying and realizing, oh, Lord, how are we going to do this? How do we, Durban's such a big place, and how do we connect, and what do we do there, you know? But that's also the beginning of the formalization of Sunsurf South Africa.
Yeah.
Because it was the Sunsurf National Gathering.
Yeah. And there were some amazing guys that we got to meet in time around that. As I said, that conference that we had at Queensbury at, I think, Graham's church, and Brett Eady coming along and meeting Brett for the first time. And then Brett walking out to go and paddle at Queensbury for the first time, slipped on a rock, dinged his board, hurt himself, and he couldn't surf for the rest of the conference. Stuff like that. But it was...
I think Craig might have been at that same conference. That might have been the beginnings of the whole national footprint of Christian surf.
Yeah. So we met some legends from Durban. That's the point. And Craig Jordan was a wildcat.
And Gordon Downs. And Gordon is he's a massive business guy now, but I remember back then him going, well, so what is your plan? How does it work? And I was like, well, basically we kind of just pray, and then we go surfing and do stuff.
Yeah.
And he was like, and? I was like, well, no, that's it.
And it worked, right? It was a working formula.
Yeah. You pray, God does stuff, you follow on with that. But I'm keen to hear how you got to Cape Town.
Yeah, so I'd been discipled under Steve, Ganubi Baptist. 94, I got married. And 95, Steve left Ganubi, and I had to help run the church. I was the youth pastor come...
So you left SAA, you now become...
Yeah, during 93 or 90-something, I became the youth pastor at Ganubi Baptist, which was cool. Because I could go surfing in the morning and then be at the office. And it was just a really cool season. But it was doing local church youth stuff, but it was also having freedom to play in this Christian surfer space. And we had traveled a bit more during that time around events locally and whatever. So there was, opportunity to build this thing. And Steve didn't think we were mad. We had his endorsement and things were going well. Steve said, I think you need to go to Bible school. And he said, there was another guy at our church, and he said, you need to go to Joburg, and you don't need to go to Joburg. And I was like, hallelujah. So he sent me to Cape Town, and I went to Cape Town, and with that, I got a student pastor's role at Somerset West Baptist Church under Dennis Lewis.
Wow, yeah. And Dennis Lewis was connected with Graham Ganetsky. He'd moved over to Somerset. Amazing church, that.
Yeah. And so, for the next 16 years, that became my home church. So I moved from Ganubi to Thing and studied at Bible school. That was a very stimulating time in my life. But we were able to be part of the Christian Surfers thing. And during that time, you guys didn't have a lot going on in the Strand, which was the Boerland. And so you were sort of around Orange Street and the Peninsula and the Cape. And so we could bring something of that out to our area more remotely.
Sid, Puppy.
Ah, yeah, those legends.
Biffle and Francois.
Yeah, they got involved with. We started Christian Surfers there. Same thing. Pray, go surfing, and stuff happens. So we started to do that.
That whole area.
Yeah, and we've got a beautiful area that area, and so surfing and started to splice in the God tapestry, right? Got to splice in with some of these legends, Sid and Francois, who both became national board members, and both
board members. That was not board members as in surfing. Like we didn't even know we needed a board.
Yeah.
But I think at this stage we've now got a national footprint, and we're starting to realize we need governance and people.
Yeah. And within our crazy little network, people were starting to emerge who had incredible giftings. Mark Edwards, that naughty surf rat. I mean, how important Mark's contribution has been. Ian Coleman, France and Sid, and others, I
do remember a really funny story, though. I remember we desperately recognized that we were bad at communication. In fact, we were terrible at it. So we asked this amazing surfer girl, to join us. And she said, yes, she'll be our communications person. And then we organized, like a couple of months on, we organized an event. We all got to the event. I don't want to mention her name. I was like, where's so-and-so? And they were like, well, did anyone think to invite her? We hadn't communicated properly.
That we wanted her there. And she was probably holding us together, right?
No, we wanted her there, but we forgot to tell her that the event was happening. So no one communicated with anyone about anything. And somehow it all just worked through the grapevine. And she left.
Lots of grace
she
needed.
Was like, nah, I can't work with you guys.
Because we were Lost Cop. We were here, there, everywhere, and nowhere, all at the same time. And yet God was in it,
So the Sun Surf's been a big part of this whole thing. And then there's a thing called Sun Surf School.
Yeah. So I was in Strand and Somerset West, running from the Baptist Church. And in 2003...
wait, what do you mean running from the Baptist church?
Well, I was working as a youth pastor at the Baptist church.
You weren't running away from the church?
No. But I really had the community beyond the church on my radar and kind of going, it's great to look after Christian kids, but I'm just aware there's so many kids in our area who need God, And so out of that came this crazy thing called Breach. And we were starting Breach, and it was just a crazy concept. It was like starting Sunsurf, but it was a localized vision. And I was part of the Boerland Surf Committee at that time. And there was a guy on that committee who had started and been running a surf school. And at the beginning of 2003, he basically turned to me in the committee meeting. Barry Humby was his name. And he said, I can't do this anymore. Would you run my surf school? And I was like, never, ever done any surf school stuff. But sure, how hard can it be? So he gave me the 5 boards he had and 1 or 2 tatty wetsuits. And I remember going and sitting down at the yacht club in the Strand, going, I now have a surf school. I now am running this thing called Breach, which is another story, but a really cool story. But how are we going to make this work? And then God in his faithfulness again, somebody had been up to Durban, one of the Strand locals, up and coming, young, good looking, energetic surfer, but who loved Jesus. And he was coming back. He had been training in Durban to run surf schools. And he was coming back to start a surf school. And I thought, I can't go head to head with this guy. So when he landed, I went to see him and I said, mate, why don't we work together? And we work under CS and we run a surf school that's going to make a difference in this. And out of that came the Sun Surf School.
Well, I think what was interesting is, like you said, you had your surf school that you'd been gifted. Then there's Mikhail, who wants to start a surf school. Two different things run by believers, both part of the local Christian Surfers crew. And I'm trying to pull this together. I've got the guy with the most pastoral gift in the world, you, and I've got Mikhail, who's like sharp on business and young and energetic, and I can just see this all working. And I'm like, and I'm thinking we need some kind of catalyst. We need some kind of thing to make this all happen. I'm in Durban. I go see Barry. I walk into his offices. What an amazing guy! He used to be. It was just such a warm legend, and you know, it's this big corporate Quicksilver office, and he makes me a nice cup of coffee, and there's patterns on the floor, and he goes, Barry was always straight up. He's like, look, Roy, I love what you guys do, but I got my budget's done for the year. You know, I've got no money for you, and I'm trying to pitch this idea, and I'm literally watching like the doors of his eyes close, and I'm praying, and I'm like, Lord, you've got to do something. So I said, I don't want money. So he goes, what do you want? I said, I want 10 surfboards, wetsuits, and a trailer to start Christian Surfers thing called Sun Surf School. And he's like, yeah, that's no problem, mate. Here's a coffee, and that's done and dusted. And I remember coming back and phoning you and Mick and going, guys, I've got our surf school. Like I've got 10 brand new quick sticks. Like, I got
that was huge.
A whole trailer full of brand new wetsuits, Quicksilver wetsuits.
Yeah.
And I remember Mick going, no way, no, you can't be here. I'm like, Mick, it's God, bro. Like, this is it. And so, and the other thing that was interesting is that at that point of time, we were experimenting with a new innovation, which was this business model, right? And I remember Mark Edwards was a significant catalyst in that, because we were like, well, what the heck, we don't know about this. And we set up the business where 33% was owned by you, 33% was owned by Mikhail, and 33% was owned by Christian Surfers.
Yeah.
And that's how we started. And I think it eventually grew to like 4 or 5 Sun Surf schools up and down the coast.
Yeah.
I know it's changed now. But tell us a little bit about the Sun Surf journey, the Sun Surf school, the surf school. I mean, you can go into Strand right now.
Yeah.
I don't know how many years later it is. And there's this beautiful, thriving, massive, big Sun Surf school.
Well, we started it in 2003. And again, local favor. There were so many people that came on board. The first and most very significant was Barry and that trailer. That put us on the beach front and center.
I remember rocking up with the trailer. I couldn't wait to, and you guys were like kids in the candy store. We were just pulling these boards out of brand new quick sticks out of it.
Blue ones and the red ones and the yellow ones. It was like the candy store.
Like amazing.
It was amazing. And so, that became our thing. And we used the yacht club as our base at that time. But we certainly, and I was on the yacht club committee to do that. So I was on a couple of committees, Boerland Surfing, Yacht Club, And Mick and I started using that equipment and started putting together lessons. I did a course through, what was his name? Anyway, I did a course on surf coaching and stuff, because again, I'd never ever done it. And I guess part of it is just having the gift of gab. But we had an amazing season. There were also local suppliers that came on board, Titch and Lifestyle. Titch got the vision. Titch is still a spiritual father to me. And he was very, very good and generous to us in that mix. Reef wetsuits came on board. You know, as the Quicksilver boards got to be needed to be replenished, Titch supplied the boards and Reef supplied the wetsuits, and it just built and built and built. We had such favor, even down to we moved the surf school from the yacht club, which we quickly outgrew and got people off sides with. And there was a guy named Carl who ran the Super Tube down in the Strand, and he was a Christian businessman, and he invited us in. We put up 1 container and 2 containers, and now we've just taken over. I was there the other day, and so cool to see what Mick's doing on the ground there. But out of that came the prospect, and funding was always our challenge, right? The prospect of using surf schools as a funding, as a connection space, but also as a funding, and that all sort of ran off that school in Strand. But Kelvin Zemke came on board in J-Bay, and he coached he coached too, and it was really cool, and it was sort of a bit beyond my time, but Mikhail sort of pioneered establishing other surf schools after I had left.
Yeah,
and that was really cool to see.
And that's actually a really good part of the story, you know, in terms of Christian surfers and Sun Surf South Africa, is that it was very difficult to grow something from a donor base, which is a sort of traditional Western model. And there were 2 things actually that were pretty significant. The first one was the surf schools, and that generated revenue for Christian surfers.
Yeah.
The second one was Breach set up a thrift store, and that thrift store model through, I don't know who the crew was that helped you set that up, but I remember coming.
Andrew and our board, yeah.
Andrew Fisser.
Yeah.
And I remember coming and sitting with you and Andrew Fisser and chatting through how this works, and then coming back to J-Bay and setting up a thrift store here.
Yeah. For Christian surfers.
For Christian surfers. Yeah. From basically just copied your model. And then it's amazing how we transitioned then to income, to funding a ministry. It's interesting because there's different stages in developing this.
Yeah.
We talk about the fun stories and the God side,
pioneering,
and all that has to always be at the center.
Yeah.
But I think as things grow, you've got to figure out a way, what is God's funding plan? And it doesn't always have to be one size fits all. And especially as Christian surfers grows around the world, there's more places that need to think outside the box in terms of being bivocational and or doing this kind of approach, But it's interesting that there were so many of those little nuggets that all came together. Yeah. There's something else I wanted to chat about, taking a little bit of a short left.
Book it, bro.
Brett Davis, as we've moved on, I think we started changing the name to Christian Surfers South Africa. And we kept Sunsurf because we wanted it to be there. The surf school made sense to stay that way. In fact, actually, the name of Christian Surfers at the moment on the books is Sunsurf Trading as Christian Surfers.
Oh, right.
The registered entity is still called Sunsurf.
Wow.
Trading as Christian Surfers. And so there's this moment where it kind of comes completely out of left field. I'm living in J-Bay at the time. I'm running Christian Surfers. You're the pastor in Strand. And there's this thing called chaplaincy that kind of drops into a guy named Richard Grillman, who's the chairman of the then ASP. He has a conversation with Brett in Australia, and they decide we're going to offer chaplaincy to the world tour. And he's like, Roy, we need to do this thing. And I'm like, what is this thing? What is a chaplain? And Pierre Tosti is running Mr. Price in Durban. So I phoned Pierre and I go, hey, look, there's this new thing Christian Surfers globally is doing called chaplaincy, and they want to give it a test run at the Mr. Price. And Pierre's like, well, I don't know what it is. He's like, but I know you, so why don't you come and do it? So I'm like, okay. So I fly up to Durban, and I'm the chaplain at the Mr. Price thing, and I'm like, nah, I can see its opportunity, I can see its power, but I'm around pegging a square hole here, mate. Like, this needs my mate, Andy Pitts. So the next contest is the Billabong Pro here in Jeffreys Bay, right?
Promised land.
Yeah. And they get told, the Billabong get told by the ASP that they will have a chaplain crew on staff. And I can't remember who the guy was, Simon Nicholson. And I can remember
his brother, Pete Nicholson.
Yeah. I remember Pete going, oh my gosh, what do I want?
And of the kooky reverend here.
Two kooky guys batting around, just causing absolute chaos.
Yeah.
And I got to pay them and feed them. And like, what is the ASP doing? But me and you rock up, and we like, the chaplains. There's no book, there's no record, there's no like, what is this? What is this thing? And I think the power of serving, I cannot think of anything more significant than that. But just wanted to hear what did it feel like when I said, hey, bro, like, you're coming, basically we ended up cleaning dustbins and toilets. That's the reality of what we did.
Yeah. So Ro phoned me up saying, hey, would you come and work as a chaplain at the Billabong Pro? And I was like, geesh, that's a big step. Like, but sure, let's do it. And that was always the thing. There were always opportunities. And I think over time I've learned that you just got to jump and step and see what God does. And it's always been exciting because it's always worked out well. And so it did with chaplaincy. As you say, we didn't quite know what we were supposed to be doing there. Nobody even knew what we were supposed to be doing there. So we could kind of do anything. And so I just got involved doing the things I do, serving coffees, serving lunches, serving food. And somebody came to me at the event going, who the heck are you? Because I have not had service like this at any event anywhere in the world. That's ASP staffy, going. So we realized that we were hitting some good mark. And then, Peter seemed very interested for us to carry on. And he was really a person of peace. He was lovely to work with. And he always created opportunities. There were others like that.
But I think with Peter, I don't think he knew what he was going to get. Yeah. And he was told which I wouldn't have liked either. And then I think, Andy, just to say, you were so good at having conversations with people, and your ability to do that, and then but also to do the hard work and the service that no one else wants to do, and to actually make Peter's life easier. I remember the next year he was more than happy to have us there, and actually the work that you did opened the door for Christian Surfers to have a whole team there at some point.
Yeah.
But I think for me, what was interesting about chaplaincy, and specifically, and if I look back, not just at this event, but at other events, is your ability to connect with people. I mean, I used to come visit you, and we'd be going to the beach, and I knew I need to make sure that Andy Pitt does not find another human, because he will have a conversation with them. It's going to take us 30 minutes to walk 5 minutes, because he's going to pastorally care for or ask questions. And I think that's an incredible gift that you brought to Christian Surfers, and kind of found its space in chaplaincy, right?
Yeah, chaplaincy just lends itself to that, and I think you just play to what you think you can bring. And so knowing yourself and what you have in your hands, and chaplaincy certainly provided that. In fact, 2009 was an interesting chaplaincy year, because we had Brad Whitaker and Abe Andrews from Australia, and Abe was now the tour chaplain. So his role was different, because he was focused on the athletes.
He was behind the curtain.
He was behind the
safe
curtain.
space behind the curtain.
Yeah. And I was a local chaplain. And then Brad was there, who had pioneered chaplaincy for Christian Surfers International. And so Brad, it was some very interesting conversations, and positionally, the three of us almost focused in different spaces around the event, but the event's got so much opportunity, and to be able to learn from them, but go, that's me, that's not me, I can do that, and each one of us finding our space within it. But we had such favor at the the Billabong Pro. Every morning we had Nick, what was his surname?
Oh, Nick, the commentator.
Nick.
Yes.
And so Nick, in England, where Nick now lives, they'd start every event with prayer. So every time that sun popped over the horizon before events started on the day, every single day, I'd be up in the booth praying over the whole event. I mean, what favor, just to serve and do, and in formal and informal ways, but just to love on people, even Jane, and working around the food, lunches, being able to create and bring a team into that space, which was more opportunity to serve and created more connection. And it was just an incredible season. So event after event, I did 4 events and then left to Australia, and other guys have picked up the events. And I've been able to work at the Margaret River Pro doing some of the same stuff since then, so that my chaplaincy story has moved on into Australia. And sadly, that one's just sort of come to a more abrupt end. But it's been an incredible journey with ASP and then WSL, and all from Richard Grolman saying, I see needs among surfers that I see a spiritual need there, and their support is important. And I'm grateful.
Kind of brings us back to the Lost Boys, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that's some of the things that I really love about Christian Surfers, is that it's not like I feel like I'm trying to reach a tribe of people that I don't understand. I'm trying to reach my brothers and sisters. I want them to have the joy that I have. It's their choice. I don't want to ever force it on anyone.
Yeah.
But the guys I surf with, I want them to know the joy of that I found.
Jesus,
and create the opportunity for them, if they would choose it. So, But that's probably a good segue. Like if you're a young person watching this, thinking like, wow, that's amazing. When I look back, I don't think it was amazing. We just did what we did today, which was fun. We loved fun. And
still do.
And absolutely. But we did it with authenticity and following, with God. But like if you're looking back now on this side, never thought we'd be looking back this far. But what would your encouragement be to somebody who's, there's a young Andy Pitt who's trying to find his way, maybe, is struggling, and then there's the Andy Pitt that's found Jesus, but he's young. What would your encouragement be as they like looking ahead?
I think the story of my life really is around the little boy. There's an unsung hero in Jesus feeding the 5,000 in my books, and it's this little boy who offered his lunch. And I really think that the little boy took what he had, 5 loaves and two fish, small, didn't have much to bring, but he offered what he had. And Jesus took it and he blessed it and he multiplied it.
Yeah.
And I really think that's the story of what this has been for me. It's taking the little things that are in your hands, giving them to him, and watching him do amazing things, like amazing things. As I sit here, I'm just blown away by the stories and the memories, because you forget stuff, and privileged to be part of this. And when you do kingdom stuff for God, when you use what is in his hand, he delights in that, and he wants to use it. And I think we can change the world, as we did with Christian Surfers and Sun Surf, but we get to play in these amazing spaces and bring Jesus with us. So that for me is the stoke, you know.
Bro, I love that. That is so profound, you know. I think someone said something interesting to me. They said that, you know, when Jesus was going to feed the 5,000, he actually made them sit down in groups. And I think that's the way this works. There's the young boy. He's not thinking about what's going to happen, how it's going to work. He doesn't know that 5,000 men, and that's excluding women and children, are about to be fed with his lunch. Jesus does. Yeah. He sees the big picture. He's got people sitting down in groups already. Why would you have people sitting down? He's building the structure. He's telling people what to do. He's got his disciples making everyone sit down, because he knows somewhere there's a little boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish who's going to be like, you can use this.
Yeah, that's right.
Knowing that I was a lost boy, that I was found by Jesus, and looking at the crew and going, you know what, I want this for you. Like, I want you to, we have to choose it. Like, God, and I think that's the thing. If I think of folk in JV that might be listening to this, it's not to push it onto anyone, because that's not how I see Jesus working. But he stands there like he did over that kid with the 5 loaves, and he goes, well, welcome to come play.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a wild ride. And I think that's the...
So glad we jumped on board, right?
Well, it's always an invitation. Sea salt, an invitation. Breach, an invitation. There's always an invitation to go on the next swell, the next adventure. Surf Church Collective, invitation. I think God's always doing something new. There's always a new swell in the water. And his invitation to us as surfers is, do you want to ride it with me?
Yeah, absolutely. And by his grace, we're riding it in Australia now. But I'm so stoked to come back and just get a glimpse back into the old story. And it's our baby, you know, and so it's precious. And just to celebrate the good things that are going on and the next generation. And
that's exciting.
That
is exciting, mate. And I think that's the thing that's so important for this series is we don't want to look at this as a nice reminiscent thing. It's about the question, I would say, is this, the way you framed it is beautifully. Like right now, the young people watching this who have their 5 loaves and 2 fish and are going, well, there's nothing much I can do with this. And that's the beauty of it. It's not about what you can do with it. It's about what he can do with you and those 5 loaves and 2 fish.